Leo, welcome back to our channel. You know, as ambassadors, we see something happen all the time that's, it's not frustrating, it's sad, because I think people don't necessarily know what to do with this. And that is that they label their story in the wrong genre, and they're really missing out on some reads because of that.
And this isn't just a problem we see with new writers. We see this with people who have like thousands and thousands of reads that have their story in the wrong category. So we hope that this helps. So the first thing we want to say are the two most popular genres on Wattpad. And you probably guessed what they are. They are romance and teen fiction. So before we even go into the description of those, we want to tell you why you should try to avoid labeling your story romance or teen fiction. I understand that you're telling a story, a love story, you want to call it romance. I get it. And sometimes maybe that's all it is. But if there's any other element of anything in that story, try to put it under a different genre. Same thing with teen fiction. Those two genres are so oversaturated. When we wrote Adrift, we had it under teen fiction. And they said to us in our feedback, why don't you think about putting this in mystery thriller? Because there's so many people in teen fiction, it's getting lost, and we want it to get more attention. And guess what? It did. So here we go. This is where we're going to go rapid fire. That's all we're going to say about advice for you on the genres. Everything else is going to be pretty informational here. So here we go. Tell us about romance. Go.
Romance, basically, if you're going to have to put it in romance, this is any story that the plot of the story is falling in love. Easy. If that's the plot, put it in romance. A great example of this would be The Notebook. That's the plot of The Notebook. Noah and Allie, it's their love story.
Teen fiction. Teen fiction traces the ins, outs, ups, and downs of growing up and the emotional, physical, social experiences of a teenage protagonist. They often take place in high school. I wrote a whole series of teen fiction. There really wasn't anywhere else to put that. An example for it would be The Perks of Being a Wallflower. That's a teen fiction story. It's all about teens. That's one of your favorites. It's a great book. So that's an example of teen fiction. I said I wasn't going to give any more advice, but one more thing. If you put your story in teen fiction, you really shouldn't rate it mature. Especially if it's for sexual content. If it's for violence, if it's some kind of like horror story involving teens, okay, that's different. But you should not have super spicy scenes in a teen fiction book. Okay, I'm done.
So let's go quickly through your other options so you can know if there's a better place to be putting your story.
Action.
The protagonists are thrust into it. That was a perfect beginning. The protagonists are thrust into a series of events that typically include violence, extended fighting, physical feats, rescues, and fantastic chases. A great example of this would be the Born Identity series. Adventure.
Adventure has a lot of the things that action has, except add to it, it's focusing on a journey and not just a series of fights and feats. Like, the characters are going somewhere and trying to accomplish something. For example, Journey to the Center of the Earth. Chick lit.
Deals with the issues, struggles, themes, and modern womanhood. There can be romantic elements in chick lit, but generally should deal more with the female protagonist, relationships, friends, family, career, experiences, etc. Great example of this would be Confessions of a Shopaholic. Fan fiction.
Fan fiction is writing that takes characters from another already established fandom, such as Harry Potter, One Direction, Lord of the Rings, High School Musical, whatever it is, it's characters that have already been established. But the writer takes their own story and puts those characters inside it. You could even insert the reader into fan fiction, and we see that a lot on Wattpad. For example, the original After. One more piece of advice. Do not put your story in any other genre if it's fan fiction.
Yeah.
Because if I start reading, no offense to BTS, but if I start reading a story and at the end of the first chapter I realize I'm reading about Jungkook, I'm not going to be real happy. I don't like fan fiction. That's just me. So please don't trick me into reading your fan fiction. Yeah. So if you've got already established characters, please put it in fan fiction lest you piss off your readers. Fantasy.
Ooh, this one I love so much. Fantasy is anything where you have an entire world that is imaginary. So if dragons, imaginary. Magic, imaginary. So anything fantastical would be fantasy. A great example of this would be A Court of Thorns and Roses. General fiction.
This is sometimes called contemporary fiction or adult fiction. It focuses on the everyday experiences and conflicts of a protagonist that is typically 25 years or older. It's intended for older readers, has more mature themes. It's not something that younger people would probably be drawn to. We don't see a lot of general fiction on Wattpad. In fact, I had a really hard time thinking of an example at all. But the example I thought of was Extremely Loud and Incredibly Close. Historical fiction.
Historical fiction is any type of fiction that takes place in history. So if there's an element of it that is true to history, it would be historical fiction. A great example of this that's really popular right now is the Bridgerton series. Horror.
Oh, that's one of my favorites. Horror is a form of fiction that intends to scare or disturb the reader through a protagonist experience with some sort of bad force, some sort of menacing antagonist, not just another person. It could be another person, but it could also be something monstrous or demonic. It often evokes some sort of real response in the reader, could even be a physical response. And an example of that would be almost anything Stephen King writes, but the example that came to my mind first was The Shining. Humor.
Humor is a story that seeks to entertain the reader by funny elements. And a great example of this would be One for the Money by Janet Ivanovich. Mystery thriller.
A mystery thriller story features a protagonist who's investigating a crime, some sort of problem, puzzle, something that's unknown. The protagonist could be a detective or an amateur. They're struggling to achieve something and having to endure this mystery that they have going on. A thriller could be creepy. It often is, but it's not the same thing as horror. It's often a psychological kind of creepy. For example, Gone Girl. Nonfiction.
Nonfiction is any story that has real elements to it. So, for instance, a biography or a recounting of an event that happened. A popular example of this would be Promised Land by Barack Obama. Paranormal.
Oh, paranormal. This is our preferred genre. Love it so much. It is a form of fiction that sort of combines a lot of fantasy, maybe even horror, mystery thriller. It combines romance, all kinds. I think that's why we love it so much, because you can combine all of these things. It occurs in a modern day setting usually. It contains creatures or happenings that are beyond the scope of normal scientific understanding or normal occurrences, such as ghosts, angels, demons, witches, vampires, werewolves, clairvoyance, or telekinetics. An example of that would be Edge of the Veil.
Oh.
It is, but a very well-known example is A Discovery of Witches. Poetry.
Poetry is what it is. It's rhymes, rhetorical devices, figures of speech, anything along that. If you're putting together a poetry book, it needs to go under poetry. Great example of this is Milk and Honey. Random.
Random. All right, so the random genre is specifically for Wattpad. There are works of writing that don't easily fit into a category, and they are aware of that, and they're trying to come up with new content areas all the time, new categories that people are writing in. But when you have a story that doesn't fit in any of the genres, you would put it into random. And I don't have an example for that. Because it's just for Wattpad. So the example of that would be if you've written a story that you just can't place anywhere else, that's where it should go. And be careful with putting your story in random, because a lot of people don't take those seriously. Science fiction.
Science fiction is typically futuristic in nature, and it revolves around something that can be explained scientifically. So it's not the same as a fantasy. That stuff is not explained at all. This, you have real world elements of science in it. An example of this would be Ready Player One. A short story.
Short stories are works of brief narrative prose. They usually focus on a limited number of characters and a very limited number of events. There's one plot incident, usually very shorter and more compact than a novel. Short stories will leave the reader with just a snapshot of an event that happened. So, for example, The Monkey's Paw. Spiritual.
Spiritual fiction often revolves around a protagonist who embarks on a journey of self-reflection and self-actualization, which includes spiritual, although not necessarily religious, experiences. A great example of this would be Life of Pi. Vampire.
Oh, vampire. This is pretty self-explanatory. Believe it or not, vampire genre has to do with vampires.
Ooh.
Usually has romance. Ooh, I know. Usually has romance, sometimes violent. Example, Twilight. Sorry, Twilight hater. I know you're out there. I know, viewer that hates us for mentioning Twilight. There it is. Twilight. Werewolf.
Werewolf is pretty much just like vampire. It revolves around the lores and ideas of werewolves. And a lot of times on Wattpad, they are romantic also and contain some violence. An example of this would be Silver Bullet.
Okay, the point, be familiar with these genres. Don't place your story in the wrong one, because then you're gonna lose some readers. Or you may not ever get the readers that you want because they aren't looking in the right spot.
Also remember that you want to look at whatever the plot is driven by, that is your genre. So although you may have romance in your story, and a lot of romance, if there is a fantasy plot, then you want to be placing it in fantasy and not in romance.
All right, so that's it. Those are the genres on Wattpad. Please pay attention to those. Please. Your readers will be forever grateful, and you will get more attention if you put your stuff in the right section. So if you want to go and read our stories, which involve fantasy, paranormal, romance, teen fiction, sci-fi, mystery thriller, go to either Crystal's profile at Crystal J. Johnson, my profile at Eternal Felicity, or if you want to read a lot of paranormal romance, at Crystal and Felicity.
Remember guys, these videos, we do them for free, just like our stories on Wattpad. So the best way to reward us if you're getting something from our videos is to give the video a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and then for your sake, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a Friday upload.
And as always, write what you love.